So I want to bring in Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California. He voted to keep McCarthy as Speaker and has now endorsed Congressman Jim Jordan as his replacement. Thanks for joining us. And so I want to talk a little bit about your pick thus far for the next Speaker, Jim Jordan. I know that you wanted to see Kevin McCarthy keep his position. It didn't work out that way. I know you've got a long relationship with Jim Jordan, and he certainly has conservative street cred. He's known for his fiery questioning during hearings. But he's also, you know, the representative that tweeted out right after the 2020 election that the Democrats were trying to steal the election after the election. Most recently, after Donald Trump's latest indictment for trying to overturn the outcome of the 2020 election, he tweeted that Donald Trump did nothing wrong, that all he was doing was trying to drain the swamp. I want to ask you what you're looking for in a speaker. Someone who can unite your party and work with Democrats, or something else?
Well, Anne-Marie, I think it's pretty important to understand that Speaker McCarthy would still be there if 100% of the Democrats hadn't decided that his working with them wasn't going to save him. So let's first start by making the assumption that working with the Democrats is something you do from a position of power, never from a position of weakness. Kevin McCarthy literally would still be Speaker if a handful of Democrats had simply voted present. They chose not to. They let him get evicted. They're as much part of the chaos as the 8 members of the Republican Party who voted to oust him.
But, you know, I can also argue that he would still be Speaker if 100% of Republicans voted in favor of him maintaining that position. I mean, to say that it's a Democrat, it was a Republican representative, as you know, Mr. Gates, who put forward, who started this process. So aren't the Republicans as much, if not more, to blame for the position that the House is in right now?
You know, only the media would say that that over 200 Democrats voting to oust him is somehow not nearly as much as 8. 95+% of the Republicans here in the House, including everyone who is now running to be Speaker, voted to retain Kevin McCarthy because we felt that if anything, we might have let him down by not getting enough done soon enough to satisfy those 8 members. But that's not where we are today. Where we are today is we have to do what historically the Republican Party has done, which is find the most conservative candidate that can win. And the most conservative candidate that can win, in my opinion, is Jim Jordan, somebody who founded the Conservative Freedom Caucus, but also was able to hold down and do a great job as chairman first of Oversight and now of Judiciary. He's proven to be a leader and to bring people together, and that's why, you know, I'm backing him, in addition to the fact that he used to be my subcommittee chairman on Oversight, and I've known him a long time to be a tenacious fighter for the conservative movement.
I think no one would argue with that description of him. One of the things that presented the greatest challenge, I think, for Kevin McCarthy is one of the rules changes, a change that he agreed to get the speakership, which allowed for a single representative to start this process to remove him. Do you think it's time to look at those rules again before even sort of moving forward?
You know, I think that there's no question at all that Republicans, by and large, believe that you ought to have more votes than there were apostles if you're going to unseat the Speaker. So whether it's a dozen or, as Nancy Pelosi had it, the majority of her conference, it needs to be a reasonable number. The Speaker had the confidence of virtually all Republicans on the day he stopped being Speaker, and that really isn't where we should be. Additionally, a Speaker should have the ability to, if you will, sometimes make hard decisions that aren't always popular, even in his own party. He didn't make one that wasn't popular by 95%. He made a decision that wasn't popular by 8 members, and those 8 members would have shut down the government. And I repeat, shut down the government as their alternative. And I think that, in fact, his averting that shutdown, his allowing us to finish appropriating the number of bills we have yet to do was the right decision. But Kevin has decided not to run again, and we're now looking for, as William F. Buckley famously said, the most conservative candidate that can win.
So then do you think that rule that allowed for a single member to begin the process of ousting the Speaker should be scrapped or changed?
You know, Speaker Pelosi never, when she had a 5-seat majority, would have tolerated something that would allow her to be ousted by the squad. And I think going forward, we need to change that rule. But right now, what we need to do is get a consensus on a speaker and then have that discussion. So I would suspect that the rule change will come second, not first.
Do you think that there is a willingness, a desire within your caucus for more unity? I mean, will anyone be able to unite this party and maintain the speakership position? And I know you think Jim Jordan is the man, but you have to admit that this is going to be a tough position for anyone to take.
And Marie, this is an impossible position that one of probably two men are going to have in a few days. And the reason it's impossible, quite frankly, is that the across-the-aisle bipartisan nature has been ruptured over the last few years. We need to rebuild that on important issues: national defense, intelligence, our combating China's aggression. There's a lot of areas, and quite frankly, we do have bills that are bipartisan, but we need to begin moving them to get the confidence that America can work. Now, that's something Speaker McCarthy was making efforts to do, and the next speaker is going to have to both unite us and make that process work better. We've got appropriation bills coming up. I want to see those bills be conservative but inclusive, and I think we can get there.
All right, and keep the job. Congressman Issa, thank you very much.